This week is Parshas Vayikra, and it's also the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, the book of Vayikra. So last week was Chazak, we finished the book of Shemais, Exodus. So this week, new Parsha, new Sefer, and the theme that we're going to talk about applies to both. So the book of Vayikra in English generally is referred to as the book of Leviticus. It's about the Levim, the service in the Mishkan, in the Beis Hamikdash, the Karbonos, etc., which was all carried out by the tribe of Levi. The question is, we now do not have a Beis Hamikdash, unfortunately, and may we have the Beis Hamikdash again immediately. Amen. Good job. But we are all learning the Parsha. The Torah, right? The word Torah means teaching, but not academic teaching. Torah Horah means instruction. Torah is a user manual. It's a set of instructions, of directives. Why do we today, when we learn it today, it's still Torah today? Which means that this week's Parsha, when we learn in this week's Parsha about Karbonos, about sacrifices, when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, we don't have a temple, we don't bring sacrifices, how is it that the Torah, that this is giving us instruction in the form of telling us about sacrifices? That doesn't seem to be an instruction to us today. Oh, good. So, obviously it is. The question is how? In what way? What is the instruction that the Torah is telling us when it speaks to us today in our lives in the context of sacrifices? So there are a few things here that we're going to clarify to bring it all together. Number one is, as we've spoken about in the past, relatively recently, the idea of the Mikdash, the Mishkan. We've been talking about the Mishkan. The Mishkan was the tabernacle. It's one of those words. It's like phylacteries. Yeah. I don't know why they translate Mishkan into tabernacle, because anybody who knows what tabernacle is only knows that because they know it's English for Mishkan. Anybody who knows what phylacteries are only knows that word because they know it's the translation of tefillin. So just say tefillin.
Tabernacle sounds like it belongs in a fish tank.
That's because you're thinking barnacle.
Yeah.
It's like what's another fun way to say barnacle? Oh,
Tabernacle.
Why would that apply to this? That's
Just a funny word to say.
So,
I don't know.
anyways, but the Mishkan was basically the temporary traveling Beis Hamikdash, the temple in the desert. And the sacrifices Karbonos were only allowed to be brought once the Beis Hamikdash was built, were only allowed to be brought there. So, and really this was the focus of the Beis Hamikdash, the focus of the temple, the primary thing. There were a lot of amazing things that happened, but the primary thing that happened was sacrifices. Question?
Oh no, it comes from the Latin taberna, which means hut or tavern.
Which means, sorry, tavern?
Yeah, hut.
Oh.
And then it
More hut than tavern.
Which means tent.
There's a very big story about why it really shouldn't be a tavern.
Thank you.
There's a really big story about why exactly it shouldn't be a tavern.
Well, you're not allowed to, the Kohanim are not allowed to show up intoxicated.
Although I guess no one ever really shows up intoxicated.
Wait, so what are you going to do on like Purim?
You do have a point there. It's like, what do you put in a toaster? You know, that one?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Anyways, okay, so.
Like, what are the Lubavitchers going to do? Because we love being chicker every now and then.
Every now and then.
You're allowed to have a farbrengen and say l'chaim, just not as for a kohen who's about to go bring karbonos in the Beis Hamikdash. That's all.
I feel like Kohanim nowadays aren't really allowed to.
Yes,
Interesting. Okay.
but when there is a Beis Hamikdash and they have a schedule and they know when they're going to be on schedule, when they're not on schedule, perhaps it's different. Anyway, so.
Schedule your drinks accordingly. Have a designated Cohen.
So, in the Beis Hamikdash, first of all, what does the Beis Hamikdash mean to us today? There is a pasuk that says, "Va'asu li mikdash," and you will make for me a temple. Is that pasuk not talking to us today? Obviously it is. The question is how, and as we've said, numerous times. The pasuk says, "Va'asoli mikdash," and they will make for me a temple, "V'shachanti b'soichem," and I will dwell in them. Now, the basic way of translating the pasuk is, and it's an accurate way of translating the pasuk is, "And they will build for me a mikdash, v'shachanti b'soichem," and I will dwell among them. But in addition to meaning among them, it also means in them. And they will build for me a temple, and I will dwell in them. How could it be dwell in them if it's a temple? Doesn't seem to add up. And the answer is, they will each build for me a temple, and I will dwell in them in each of the temples that each one builds. Every one of us is here to build a temple, to make our homes into a temple, make our bodies into a temple. What's a temple? A temple is a dwelling place, a place where Hashem dwells comfortably, where Hashem feels at home. Every one of us has the responsibility and opportunity and privilege to make our home, our body, our soul, our environment, our community, the people around us, our lives into a temple, i.e. into a place where Hashem feels comfortable being present, a place where Hashem feels at home. Now, in a Mishkan, in a Mikdash, in a temple, one of the foremost and primary things that was done was sacrifices. If we look at the Hebrew word for sacrifice, what's the Hebrew word for sacrifice? Korban.
No more art dogs.
Korban is a sacrifice. Karev, close. The word for offering a sacrifice, to bring a sacrifice, in Hebrew is to be makriv. Means it's in Hebrew the technical way of referring to it is poel yotze, acting on something else. Makriv literally means to make something be close, or to make something come close, i.e. to bring something close. Makriv, Korban, is something coming close to Hashem. When one brings a sacrifice, offers a sacrifice, one is making something come closer to Hashem. Now let's look at what actually the actual meat and potatoes, the nuts and bolts of what a sacrifice was. In short, it's taking an animal, very material, very tangible, and burning it on an altar. And what's left at the end? What happens at the end of taking something and burning it for hours and hours and hours until it's done burning? It's reduced basically, at least as far as we can see, tangibly to ash. You can have an animal that was a few hundred pounds, and what's going to be left at the end, visibly, is a few ounces of ash. Where did the rest of it go? It didn't disappear. The rest of it evaporated. The rest of it went into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide and water vapor. So if we started out with, let's say, 200 pounds of animal, there's still, whatever contributed to that 200 pounds, those molecules still exist. There's still the same 200 pounds worth of molecules. It's just now that we have a little bit of carbon left, and the vast majority of that mass of that 200 pounds has become vapor. It has evaporated, become vapor, gone into the air in the form vapor or gas in the form of water vapor and carbon dioxide. So the vast majority, almost the entirety of this animal has been converted from being solid, tangible, to being quite intangible, a lot less tangible, a lot less material. Material is not quite the right word because it's still physical, it's still material, but much less tangible, let's say. And this goes together with the fact that it's a korban, it's coming close. The way that something comes close to divinity, the way that something comes close to the Creator, close to godliness, is by becoming less materialistic, becoming less about that which is tangible, more spiritually oriented, more abstract oriented. And this absolutely is something that is relevant to every single one of us, every single minute of every single day of our lives. If we want to have our own mikdash, Hashem says they will each make for me a temple and I will dwell in them. If we want our home, our environment, our body, our life, our activities to be a temple for Hashem, a place where Hashem is comfortable to be present, to dwell, to feel at home, the way to do that is to be makriv, to bring ourselves closer to Hashem. How do we do that? What happens? What is the reality of sacrifice? The reality of sacrifice is taking something very tangible, very material, and making it less tangible. Making it, and the idea is for us to make ourselves and our lives not necessarily at all even less involved in the material and the tangible, because that's what we're here for. If we weren't supposed to be involved in the material and the tangible, Hashem would have created angels and stopped there. He didn't. Hashem created us as people, souls that are partnered with and living in physical bodies so that we can interact with the physical and the tangible. But the question is not what are we doing necessarily, per se. The question here is, where is our head at? Why are we doing it? What's our interest? What's our motivation? What are we focused on? What do we care about? And this is something that we are here to work on, to take our focus, our direction, the thing that we are oriented towards, and to bring that center of our lives, that focus of our lives, closer to Hashem. Not to be less involved in material things necessarily, but to be less materialistic. We should be involved in physical things, but we should be involved in physical things for the right reasons. Our focus, our interest, our intention should be abstract oriented, spiritually oriented, God oriented, purpose oriented, meaning oriented, as opposed to material oriented. So the idea is to become less materialistic, less focused on the tangible, the material, etc. And as we work on making progress in this direction, on becoming less materially oriented, less focused on that which is material and tangible, we are, in a way that's analogous or equivalent to the animal on the altar, we're becoming not less material, but less materialistic, the same way that the animal gets converted from that which is tangible into vapor. The focus of our lives is becoming less material and tangible, more abstract. As that focus and our interest and motivation and orientation becomes more and more centered around divinity, the reason we're here, the Creator, Torah, mitzvahs, spirituality, etc. So this is the idea of sacrifices of karbones. Now, if we take a look at the foremost carbon, and we actually talked about this briefly last week, that was brought, I don't know if foremost is the right word, but there was a carbon that was brought twice a day, every single day. It was called the carbon tamid. Tamid means constant. Constant, I think, is probably maybe the best or close to a translation of the word. Now, the carbon tamid, a few things about it. The carbon tamid was not a particularly expensive or extravagant carbon per se, relatively speaking. It was a lamb, a sheep. The difference in cost and size, etc., between a sheep and an adult cow is enormous. A cow, a bull. There are much more expensive options, much more extravagant options available. And there are times and places when those carbonis are brought. But that's not the carbon tamid. The carbon tamid is a relatively simple, basic sacrifice, the constant sacrifice that was brought every day at the beginning and at the end. So the service in the Beis Hamikdash opened up. The first carbon of the day always was the carbon tamid in the morning. Then all the other sacrifices that needed to be brought throughout the day were brought. And then at the end, the service of sacrifices was sort of concluded or signed off with the second carbon tamid, the tamid shel ben arbaim, the afternoon or evening carbon tamid. And this sacrifice that was brought every day, it was the beginning of the service every day. It was the end of the service every day. This was a carbon that was consistent. It was brought every single day. And it was, in a sense, sort of the foundation or the cornerstone of the service of the practice of bringing carbonis. And we see the service of carbonis every day, both opened and closed with this carbon. It was something that was relatively basic. And this says to us that if we want to make ourselves, our homes, our bodies, our environments, our lives, our occupations into a mikdash, into a sanctuary for Hashem, v'shachanti b'socham, and we want Hashem to dwell in our own individual temple that we are constructing, our job is to be focused on sacrifices, on this idea of orienting towards becoming less materially oriented, less tangible oriented, more focused on things that are more abstract, on purpose, on meaning, on divinity, on things we can't touch. And what this specific detail of the carbon tamid is telling us is the primary, nuts and bolts, the thing that is constant all day, every day. It doesn't necessarily have to be super extravagant. Not everything has to be, this is one of the many ways, one of the many things that, social media and this sort of part of life today, one of the ways in which it causes truly, honestly, I would think it's not an exaggeration to say catastrophic damage, is that nobody is posting on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or anywhere else them just like, the regular mundane parts of day-to-day life that make up the vast majority of everyone's life. What do they post? The things that are dramatic, the things that are exciting, the things that are extravagant. And that's what people post. So when you get on and you scroll, what you see is an extraordinarily inaccurate representation of reality of people's lives. It looks like everything's always exciting, everything's always extravagant, everything's always dramatic, and it's not. And that creates, number one, it creates an unrealistic expectation that can cause disappointment and frustration. It can drive people to try to achieve levels of excitement and drama that are just not only unrealistic, they're unsustainable, they're very unhealthy. We're not supposed to be involved in drama 24/7, but that's what it makes it look like. And that's not the case. That's not life. A person doesn't have to be doing extravagant, dramatic, amazing, positive things that are gonna, their life doesn't have to be a 24/7 highlight reel in order to be profoundly meaningful, profoundly fulfilling, and profoundly valuable and spiritually connected. It's not necessary. It's not reality. The carbon tamid was on the more simple and basic end of the spectrum in terms of the, how extravagant a sacrifice could be. And this was constant sacrifice, because the constant carbon, the constant coming close, the constant being a more spiritually oriented person, it's not dramatic 24/7. It's not extravagant 24/7. It can be, and the reality is that the vast majority of it is the simple, basic little things in life. Simple, basic little things make up that constant carbon, that constant coming close. All the little things that are not fancy and are not going to excite anyone and they're not going to make a highlight reel, that is the carbon tamid. That's the constant coming close. And it's part of human nature, I think it's fair to say, regardless of social media, which is the reason why, things catch on the way that they do. Our attention is drawn towards things that are dramatic, things that are exciting. You see fast action, excitement, drama. It catches our attention. That's the way it is. And, things that are dramatically good, extravagantly good, are really good. But that's not the reality of ongoing, steady, constant life. If it was, it wouldn't catch our eye. And it's supposed to catch our eye because it's supposed to be occasional. And this carbon is telling us, it's the Torah telling us this. It's giving us instruction. Don't think that to be deeply connected to spirituality, deeply plugged into the Creator, deeply fulfilled, to be fulfilling the purpose of your existence in a very profound way, don't think it has to be 24/7 excitement and drama. It doesn't. Every simple, basic little moment of your life can be a carbon, can be an instance of coming close to Hashem. There's nothing that's too simple, too basic, not dramatic enough to be a part of our makriv, offering up, coming closer to Hashem. And on the contrary, this is the primary, the steady, the carbon tomid, the steady, ongoing, continuous redirection towards Hashem, coming closer to Hashem, becoming less materialistic and more spiritually oriented, that the bulk of that is these simple, basic, non-dramatic things.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I might be wrong. Wasn't it like one of the days you remember is the day they stopped bringing the carbon tomid? Or is that something else? Like around the destruction of the temple?
And?
But isn't it like, so when we cease to serve Hashem with the little things we do, almost without thinking, when we cease to serve Hashem that way, is that?
You know what? I think that you make a very good point. And think about what it would look like if a person would say, you know what, in the things that are exciting and a big deal and drama, I'm all in to serve Hashem. All those mundane things, those basic things, who cares, like big deal, whatever, I'll just do whatever I feel like. Which one's going to make up the vast majority of a person's life, and which one of those two is going to make or break the general direction of a person's life? Yes, very much. And it's an important lesson. It's not only in Torah and mitzvahs and connecting to Hashem, etc. It's everything. It's the reality of any sort of progress in life. There is such a thing for explosive growth, and it has a time and a place and a value. That's true. But the overwhelming majority of positivity that's achieved, of growth, of development, etc., the overwhelming majority of that comes from the tiny little things that are not exciting, they're constant, they're repetitive, and it's just making the most of each moment. That's where the vast majority of growth and productivity and development, etc., happens. Now, another thing that we can learn if we observe and pay attention to the details of this, considering that it's Torah, it's instruction to us. What's the name of this carbon? It's the carbon tomid. Carbon tomid doesn't mean daily sacrifice. It means constant sacrifice. The carbon tomid was not literally constant. It wasn't. It was brought 2 distinct times a day. It was regular. It was consistent. Tomid doesn't mean consistent. Tomid doesn't mean regular. It doesn't mean repetitive. It means constant. This sacrifice was not constant. Why is it called a carbon tomid, a constant sacrifice? If it wasn't constant? And the answer, again, lies in if we look at what this means to us. And these ideas that we're saying are also true in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. It's not like, now we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, so we're going to find some other way to interpret and explain this idea of carbon and coming close. No, this is, in a sense, the message and one of the deeper layers of meaning of karbonos, of sacrifice, and always was. And that is, again, if Hashem wanted us to be 24/7 meditating on purpose and meaning and divinity and godliness, he would have just created angels and stopped. Angels can do that. We can't. If we want to eat, we need to go, I've mentioned this several times. It's been a while. I don't know if I mentioned it this year at all. Someone did once, I don't know if you'd call it a social experiment, sort of. And he wanted to see what it would cost to produce a BLT sandwich from scratch. Like no buying any ingredients, everything from scratch. Planting the grain and, waiting for it to grow, fertilizing it, harvesting it, drying it out, grinding it into wheat, raising the well, it wouldn't have been cattle, but raising the animals, the whole thing from scratch. If there's mayonnaise, whatever it is, every single ingredient was produced from scratch. And I think the number ended up being something like $1,500 it cost to make that sandwich. Now, obviously, once you do that, you can make more than one sandwich out of that. But, nowadays, it's like your person wants a sandwich. What does it entail to eat a sandwich? To go to a shop and swipe your credit card and walk out with a sandwich. Even better, you don't even have to go anywhere. You take out your phone, you scroll on Uber Eats, you find something you want, you tap 3 times with your thumb, and food shows up 20 minutes later, which is absurd and ridiculous and amazing, but we take for granted how much goes into that, how much is involved. Now, if a person wants to eat, we all want to eat, right? And we want everybody to eat. We all want every single human being on planet Earth to have enough good, nutritious food to eat. That takes a lot of work, right? Scrolling on Uber Eats doesn't plant the seeds and harvest it and make flour and make it into bread, etc., and make you a sandwich. Scrolling on Uber Eats can't do that. Scrolling on Uber Eats can give instructions to someone to get the ingredients together into the food and deliver it to you once people have put in months and years of work to produce those ingredients. If we want to eat, it takes a lot of work. If everybody sits and meditates all day, there's no food. No food, no people. If everybody sits and meditates all day, there's no anything. There's no houses, there's no protection from the elements, there's no anything. Right? Hashem doesn't want us to spend all of our time meditating and just pursuing spirituality. That being said, that doesn't mean that we cannot, each of us, have in the context of our own personal temple, the temple that we make in our lives, our homes, etc., that cannot be in a state of carbon tomid, of continuous sacrifice. Continuously coming closer to Hashem. How? Take a look at the carbon tomid. The carbon tomid was called a continuous sacrifice. It wasn't actually continuous in reality. It was brought at the beginning of each day and at the end of each day. It was a very, very small fraction of each day, but it was called continuous. If we spend the time each day, we spend time particularly at the beginning of each day and at the end of each day, we dedicate time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of time, and to a degree, the more the better. Doing it for 30 seconds, I would say, if someone can dedicate 10, 15 minutes, it's going to be immeasurably more effective than 30 seconds, but 30 seconds is going to be immeasurably more than 0. It doesn't have to be 10 hours, and it's clearly not supposed to be 10 hours, because that would total morning and evening be 20 hours. You wouldn't even have time to sleep enough. But if we can dedicate time at the beginning of each day and at the end of each day to be bringing a sacrifice, to be bringing ourselves closer to Hashem, to be working on what we are oriented towards, what our life revolves around, what we're focused on. And we spend time in the morning, in the evening, setting that intention, coming closer to Hashem, becoming less materially oriented, more spiritually oriented, more purpose and meaning oriented, etc. The product of that is what? The product of that is we will be constantly in a state of coming closer to Hashem. If we take a few minutes in the morning every day before we start our day to set that intention, that absolutely will have an effect on the entirety of the course of our day. It will affect our priorities throughout the entire course of the day. It will affect our focus. It will affect our intention for every part of the day. Now, yes, if a person, for one time in their life, the first time they spend 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the morning, not necessarily are they going to have conscious, that intention at a level of conscious awareness all day, but it will have an effect on the whole day, and particularly the korban tamid was brought every day. It did have to be brought every day, and it had to be brought every day at the beginning and at the end. And when we have, and again, it doesn't have to be super dramatic, it doesn't have to be very exciting, it doesn't have to be something that's life-changing, making a highlight reel. Well, it actually will be life-changing, but when we take that basic, simple sacrifice, relatively non-extravagant, it's not very dramatic or exciting to spend time, introspecting, thinking about what's important to us, what our true values are, orienting ourselves, developing, a focus and intention. And we spend a few minutes doing that in the morning, we spend a few minutes doing that in the evening, every day. That will be a korban tamid. It absolutely will come together into a constant state of coming closer to Hashem. It absolutely will affect the intention of every minute of every day. If Hashem wants us to be coming closer to Him every minute of every day, if we are supposed to be constantly moving away from materialism and towards being spiritually oriented, purpose and meaning oriented, etc., how are we supposed to do that if we have to spend such a large amount of our time eating, sleeping, taking care of our health, doing what we have to do to make sure that we are financially responsible, work, generating income, taking care of family, friends, all of these things? Like, the demands on our time are enormous, and those are things that are not spiritually oriented at all, necessarily. That being said, the secret of the korban tamid is that when we spend a few minutes at the beginning of the day and a few minutes at the end of the day, setting that intention, thinking about our priorities and our values, etc., the product of that, the result of that is that when we do those things, when we do mundane things, there is an awareness, at least at some level, sometimes, and for some people it might be more sort of at the forefront of their consciousness, and for some people it might be more sort of at the back, but there is a sense of purpose and awareness of meaning, of intention, of why we're doing it in all of those things. And when a person takes out the garbage, when a person cleans the toilets, because this is part of what they have to do, and everything they do is about Hashem, is about coming closer to Hashem, then in that activity they are coming closer to Hashem. So bringing that basic, simple sacrifice at the beginning and at the end of each day does translate into korban tamid, into constantly, continuously coming closer to Hashem. Not just consistently, not regularly, not daily, continuously. Right? And those 2 times, the beginning and the end, are important and specific. It's not just 2 times during the day. Any time is incomparably better than nothing. But, right, and this has a lot to do with the way that our brains work. It has a lot to do with neurobiology. I don't remember who said this. It's not a Jewish source, but it's a very, very powerful idea. I should look it up before I quote it. But someone said something along the lines of going to sleep at night without taking a few minutes to think about what's important to us, to think about, our values, etc., has got to be the greatest possible waste of 6, 7, 8 hours, however long we spend asleep, right? When a person's asleep, if you observe someone sleeping and you don't know a whole lot about sleep, it looks like the person's just not doing anything. Now, the person's body might not be doing anything for the majority of that time, but our nervous system is extremely busy. Our brain is doing very, very important work. Our brain is sorting categorizing, processing the things that we've observed, thought about, saw, heard, etc. during the day, and putting all of those things in order. And if before a person goes to sleep, we bring the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, at the end of the day, we spend those last few minutes. If you look at what do we have in the Siddur, Krishma Sha'al HaMita, we say, is the Shema we say at night. It doesn't say Kriyas Shema Shel HaErev, the Shema that we say in the evening. It doesn't say that. It says Kriyas Shema She'al HaMita. This is Shema that you say on your bed, by your bed, right when you're about to go to sleep. And that proximity to sleep matters. Because if the last thing we do before we lie down and close our eyes and send our brain into processing, sorting, categorizing, prioritizing mode to process everything, if the last thing we do is we say Kriya Shema Sha'al HaMita, as we're about to go to bed, we say Shema Yisroel Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We think about, why are we here? Why does reality exist? What's the point of it all? What's it all about? What does life mean to me? What do I see tomorrow as an opportunity to achieve and to generate and to produce? And what do I see tomorrow as an opportunity to become? If that's the last thing we think about before we go to bed, those few minutes will have an extraordinarily disproportionate input into who we wake up as tomorrow, how we wake up, the mood we wake up in, the motivation we have, and our mindset for the whole day. And the other end of that is first thing in the morning. Right? One of the top tips that people in the broader sort of field of productivity, etc., will talk about is keep your phone out of your bedroom. If you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do when you open your eyes is take your phone and scroll, and you know what? Unfortunately, the struggle is real. Our phones are intentionally designed to hijack our dopamine systems, and the draw and the craving is very strong, and it's equally as bad as it is strong. If the first input our brain gets in the morning is bright colors, quickly changing screens, fast moving, that sets the pace for what our brain is going to crave and be focused on the whole day. It becomes much, much harder to slow down, to introspect, to think about things that actually take some time to process and to work our way through. And if in the first thing, what do we do first thing in the morning before we get out of bed is say, Moda ani lefanecha. I thank and acknowledge you, Hashem, Creator, for giving me my life, for giving me the opportunity to grow, to achieve, to make a difference, to be your partner in creation. And if we spend those most valuable minutes when our brain is booting up and waking up for the morning, and whatever we subject our brain to in those first minutes is going to have a disproportionately powerful impact on the direction our brain is oriented during the day. If first thing in the morning, the beginning of the day is Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, the Tamid, this sacrifice in the morning, doesn't have to be dramatic. It's not a big, expensive 1,000-pound ox. It's a sheep. It's relatively simple. And at the end, the last thing in the day is this same korban, this sacrifice, this coming closer, orienting ourselves towards divinity, towards purpose, towards the Creator. When we do those two things, especially at the beginning of the day, before the day starts, and at the end of the day, before we go to sleep, those two things will absolutely become korban tamid, a constant coming closer. Setting our intention, focusing on our values and priorities, etc., and doing that and thinking about what that means and translating it into practically, what that looks like in our lives, and doing that in the morning and in the evening, even a few minutes, it's not a huge deal necessarily. It's hard work. It is hard work, especially at first. Right? This is the difference between being simple and being easy. It's relatively simple. It's a very simple idea. It's nowhere near as easy to do as it is simple to understand. But it's doable. And if we put in that effort and that investment, and at first, especially starting out, it takes a lot of effort. And the truth is, it always takes effort to introspect, especially in the world we live in today. But if we can make the time to have the carbon tamid shel shachar, to bring ourselves closer in the morning, bring ourselves closer in the evening, that does translate practically absolutely into a carbon tamid, into a constant state of being closer and always coming increasingly closer to Hashem, becoming increasingly spiritually oriented, purpose oriented, godly oriented, and becoming more and more connected and plugged into divinity and to infinity. That's something that we absolutely can achieve and be doing constantly by taking the time, especially at these times at the beginning and the end of the day, to set that intention to makriv, to bring ourselves closer, to bring our mind, our focus, our intention, our mental orientation closer. And another thing we see here is that the carbon tamid was generally a broad forgiveness. It was a kapara. It would forgive sins that had been committed. And again, if we look actually, just to re-emphasize this that we talked about earlier, the degree to which this was an unextravagant sacrifice, who has the obligation to bring the carbon tamid every day? Every single Jew. We're talking millions of people around the world. It was one little sheep that was brought, and in bringing that one sheep as a sacrifice, every single Jew around the world who was obligated to bring the sacrifice fulfilled that. It was brought for everyone. So the actual contribution, now those carbonis were brought again with the money that was collected from the machatzis shekel, so it was a pool of money that was collected from all of us collectively, and that pool was used to buy them, so we actually had all contributed money towards the purchase of these carbonis. How much did each person give? We're talking a half shekel, let's say roughly 50 cents per person. It's not even per person, it's per family, or ish, but let's say 50 cents per person. 50 cents is 1 cent, 1 penny per week, ish, which is a seventh of a penny per day. Which means it's a 14th of a penny per carbon, per sacrifice. That's the amount that each of us was contributing towards this carbon every day. Very, very small. But you know what? Even a very small contribution, when that small contribution is focused on, if a person makes a little contribution in action, chances of getting that same ROI, that same return on that investment of a few short minutes of action generally are not going to be as high as the likelihood of getting a really solid ROI on a few minutes of setting our intention, of thinking. If we have a few minutes and we put it in the right place, even a very tiny contribution, when that contribution is to makriv, to offering up, to bringing ourselves closer, to bringing our focus, to achieving clarity in what we actually want, what we actually care about, how that translates into our life, even a tiny, tiny little investment translates into carbon tamid, to a continuous, constant state of coming closer. And again, those little things that are done continuously and constantly, those are the things that are responsible for the overwhelming majority of productivity, of output, of progress, of achievement. And even something little, when it's something little that's tamid, that's continuous, when we are working on ourselves continuously to come closer, and we're setting that intention at the beginning of each day, and we're transforming our entire day into a state of continuous, perpetual coming closer to Hashem, becoming more divinely oriented, more purpose oriented, etc., that puts us in a state in which sins, transgressions, things that we've done in the past become so trivial relative to who we are and the path that we're on and the momentum that we're generating and maintaining, that yes, even something little, when it's something little that's constant and that little investment is put into setting that intention and focus and clarity, in a way that it translates onto our whole day so that we're in a continuous state of coming closer to Hashem? Yes, it actually does have such an impact on who we are that things that we've done wrong, actually can go away, actually can be atoned, cleansed, etc. And, just sort of to bring that all together, we talk about when they will make for me a temple and I will dwell in them, and each of us can make our own home and body and life, etc., into a sanctuary for Hashem. That sounds nice, and it's not unrealistic or unreasonable to kind of think that's a really nice idea, and I'm sure there are some people who do that. Why? Because it's like, seriously, like I'm going to make my whole life, my home, everything into a temple for Hashem? Like, who are the kind of people who will generally say, my body is my temple? It's people who are like thinking 24/7 about how much exercise they've done and how much more they're going to do and what exercise they're going to do and what they ate and which calories they've eaten and which micronutrients they still have to get in today and how many more calories they have to eat and how many more calories they have to burn and how many reps and how many sets. People who that's their whole life. It's like, my body is my temple. Try living a functional life where, yes, I am a temple for Hashem. My body, my home, everything is a temple for Hashem. It's like, if I'm going to be that obsessed, I'm not going to have time to be a functional person. Maybe there are some people who can pull that off, but I sure can't. Most people can't. And so that's what the message of the Korban Tamid is. You don't have to. You absolutely, every single one of us absolutely can make our body, our home, our environment, our life, our surroundings, everything about us into a temple for Hashem. A complete and total temple. How? The secret of how and why that's realistic and practical for everyone is in the Korban Tamid, the constant sacrifice. It was a relatively small investment, in the ballpark of 1/14 of a penny per person, each korban. But it was continuous, it was constant. When a person makes even a small investment in bringing ourselves closer, getting that clarity and orientation at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, that does have a constant impact. It does put us in a constant state of coming closer to Hashem, a Korban Tamid. It's considered a constant sacrifice. And the reality is that when we do that, everybody can spend a few minutes in the morning. First thing, the earlier the better, immediately upon waking is best. And a few minutes in the evening, ideally right before going to bed, the closer to bed, the better. A few minutes, those 2 times a day, clarifying our priorities, our values, etc. The outcome of that is that, yes, we can be a temple and a sanctuary for Hashem. Our house, our home, our life, our work, everything about us, our body, our soul, our mind, every single part of who we are and what we do can be part of this temple for Hashem. Because every one of us is capable of being in a constant state of coming closer to Hashem. Because every one of us is realistically capable of making that small investment in the morning and in the evening, of coming closer twice a day, which translates to, which is called, that korban is a Korban Tamid, it's constant. That small investment twice a day at the beginning and the end of the day translates into being a constant state of coming closer, which ultimately means that the true identity of everything we do is coming closer to Hashem. When a person's life is focused on why we're here, what our purpose is, etc., then when that person does exercise, they are coming closer to Hashem because their intention is, this is part of what I have to do to be healthy, to be responsible, to be able to do what I'm here to do. When that person sleeps, when that person eats, when that person takes out the garbage, they are coming closer to Hashem because that's the intention. And every one of us can achieve that. Again, it's simple, it's not easy, especially starting out, but it's 100% doable. And the result on this, the return on this investment, the output and the value that we can generate for ourselves, even if we want to be, even selfishly speaking. The bottom line is there is nothing that will improve a person's quality of life more than a profound sense of purpose and meaning. Nothing. There is no source of sensory pleasure that will contribute more to a person's quality of life, the quality of a person's lived experience in the real life. There's nothing that comes close to what can be generated by a profound sense of purpose and meaning. Even if a person just wants to live the best life for themselves, wants to enjoy life the most, this is still the best investment you can make in that, better than anything else. And certainly, if we care, in addition to our own experience, to the truth and to actually living true to our purpose and to why we're here and to the purpose of existence, same thing holds true. So it's a doubly good investment because it's going to have a disproportionate outcome. It's going to put us in a constant state of closeness to Hashem and coming closer to Hashem. It's going to give us a constant tamid, a constant sense of closeness to our purpose, which is going to give us a constant sense of meaning, which is going to mean that, number one, we are actually realizing the purpose for which we exist. We are actually realizing the purpose for which Hashem created all of existence. And also, additionally, frankly, we are going to be making the greatest possible contribution towards our own quality of life.